Students of Reddit, what was the reason for why one of your teachers had a breakdown during class? My 8th grade Spanish teacher and the freshman baseball coach were having an affair. It eventually became public knowledge and she had several breakdowns as her divorce played out over the course of my 8th grade year. I had the pleasure of joining the freshman baseball team the next year and experiencing his own share of breakdowns from his own divorce. My math professor in college was going through a divorce and they were fighting for custody of their 2 younger children. You can tell he was irritated because he wore his emotions on his sleeve. One day he came into class about 5 minutes late and he was physically shaking. He was violently crying and apologized to us and said the class was cancelled. He apparently lost the custody fight with his ex-wife. Physics teacher came into class late, walked past the podium and walked into the chalkboard. Like, he would have kept walking if it wasn't there. He then picked up one of those plastic pen things that you put chalk in. Proceeded to try and write on the chalkboard even though the pen was empty of chalk. All the while mumbling incoherently. Found out later he had a stroke and managed to drive himself to the university. Teacher hit and killed a student walking on their way to school. My favorite science teacher in high school was slowly being forced out by administration. One day in class she stopped teaching and sat down in front of us and told us she had just been diagnosed with MS and began sobbing. The entire class got up and gave her a long group hug. It is one of my most cherished memories from that chapter of my life. I feel legitimately bad about causing this one. Junior year of high school, my lit teacher was from Wisconsin and had a very thick Midwestern accent. This was in the South, so a number of her intonations were very noticeable. In particular, words with an ag syllable stuck out, e.g. bag would be pronounced like a mixture of bay and egg. She was reading a passage from Beowulf to the class one day, and to paraphrase the modern English translation, came across the following sentence. Beowulf killed the dragon with the dagger. Quote, "It was too many Midwestern syllables too close together for my friend and I to handle tactfully in our 16-year-old mindsets, and involuntarily, we laughed. Upon attempting to cover it up, it probably sounded more like a snicker, and she did not take it well. I wish I could say that she scolded us, but it was so much worse than that. She shut the book, looked at the floor and straight up cried for what must have been 45 seconds, but felt like an entire 45 minutes. Dejected, breathless sobs. Once she had recovered from this, she picked it back up where she left off, like it hadn't happened. Even though, generally speaking, I really disliked that teacher, it sucked knowing that our immature reaction caused her to feel ridiculed. We didn't have malicious intent, but the result was the same, and we of course apologized to her privately after the fact. My JH biology teacher legit used to have weird-ass flashbacks of when he fought at Vietnam. Shit was pretty sad to see. Some guy came in late and started talking to his friends. The teacher chimed in with something like, "If you're gonna be late, you might as well not show up at all." So he said, "Fine, bitch," and left. She stared blankly at the door for a good 30 seconds, and then yelled at everyone else in the class for what one, now absent, student did. I distinctly remember her claiming at one point that everyone in this room is failing this class. Quote, "My university physics professor got the call that his dog had died right before a test. Needless to say, we didn't have a test that day. Not my teacher but my younger sisters at the time. The class was making fun of her recent miscarriage and her mum dying of cancer. Yes, teenagers are cruel. My history, government teacher has been to Vietnam and it's quite known that he was on the front lines. So in the middle of a lecture a girl raised her hand and asked, 'Have you ever killed someone?' The question caused him to go silent and leave the room for quite a while. Luckily the girl was ripped a new asshole by her fellow classmates. A ducktard said he'd piss on the teacher's grandpa's grave. He died 2 days earlier. There was this science teacher already on the verge of a breakdown. We called her Molecule. Someone wrote that on a leaf of one of the plants in the class and she started crying and pretty much had a breakdown. We made our English teacher cry. But we didn't want to, because we really liked her. She was about to switch to another school and she had some really important things to do. She needed to call someone, so she gave us a task to do and left the room for like 5 minutes. We were a horrible class, around 16/17 at this time and mainly boys. We had breakfast together that day and stuff was still in the classroom. So the boys decided it was time to throw it around and hit the window with stick of butter. While one boy tried to clean the window using a squeegee, is that the right word? Never used it before and I'm not native. Someone else decided to throw out the trash. Another teacher came, because she saw the trash flying by the window of her classroom, and in the moment she stared yelling at us, the other teacher came back. She immediately started crying as she saw what was going on. I think she was angry and overwhelmed because she liked the school and didn't want to leave, but in this moment we were the little assholes making the decision easier. But the next week, she came into the class and had written a small poem for us about being too old to throw around trash and playing with butter. Couple of students were arguing across the classroom. One of them thought he'd be clever and tell the other to go and hang yourself. Teacher ran out of the room crying, came back in 5 minutes later screaming at him that her dad had hung himself, called him a horrible boy, etc. She ducking asterisk quit. Asterisk like, asterisk that week. Asterisk. Everyone kind of jumped him after class. Perhaps a bit far, but I think somewhat deserved. One time in math class the emo girl was not having it. I don't even remember how it got started, but she ended up bickering with the teacher and the emo girl called the teacher Thunder Tits. It was at this point that the emo girl was sent to the office and the teacher had to take a seat at her desk in the back for a few minutes. She was a substitute teacher at elementary school, and at some point a kid took it too far and threw a bottle at her. It was an empty plastic bottle, but still. Poor teacher. We'll call him Mr. Jiggles. Of course, that's not his real name, it's not anyone's real name, but it's fitting enough, as he was a rather large fella. A nice man all the same, just rotund. Now, I heard he was on PCP, I heard he was infected by devils, I heard all manner of rumors, but from the mouth of Mr. Jiggles, none of that was true. See, one day in the middle of class he just stopped giving a lecture and somehow became stricken with the idea that he was Jesus. I'm actually not making this up. It does sound like bullshit, even writing this, but I assure you it happened. 1998 was the year, to be exact. He left the classroom and stood in the hallway waiting for class change and then picked students to bless. He'd walk up, bless a student, and then walk away, all the while preaching loudly that he was the coming of Christ. I'm not sure if it was a second coming in his mind. Who knows? Maybe it was the first. That was unclear, but one of the students wasn't receptive to his blessing and swatted at Mr. Jiggles' hand. Mistake. Mr. Jiggles grabbed him by the throat and dragged him down the hallway, promising to personally carry him into hell. He actually just carried him into a biology teacher's classroom. She tried to talk him down, but it wasn't working. The police and EMS arrived quickly enough, no one was hurt. Now, I think everyone assumed Mr. Jiggles was fired, but the next year he was back. Everyone had a version of the story and a theory for why it happened. Some say his wife was cheating on him. Others said it was some drug-induced psychosis. But one day at lunch we were talking about something unrelated and I just asked him point blank what happened. The answer: he was on some kind of psych meds, had run out, and forgot to refill them before hitting empty. His pharmacy was out of that particular medicine, told him it would be 5 days before they got it in, and he thought he'd be fine for that 5 days. He was mistaken. The one that sticks out is my history teacher, who was a level 10 incompetent at anything. She usually blathered on through class, about stupid things. She was always very well put together, dressed well, hair done, it's just there was no substance to her teaching or conversational topics. One day, she started talking about a coworker she was very close to when she was young. Mind you, she had to be approaching her 60s, the story started out innocent enough where we were all basically ignoring her, and pretty soon it veered off into this terrible reality. Her coworker had gone home from work, and died in a car accident on the way home. This had to have been 30 years ago. She was crying, saying how much she missed her, and how crazy life can be. The way she explained the story was so sad, too. They had made plans the following day, and my teacher was excitedly waiting for that coworker to come in. I disliked that teacher immensely, but I felt so sorry for her. She stood there, crying because her friend was gone. I don't think at 15 I could imagine that sort of loneliness, or pain. But now, a good 15 years later, I've had her experiences, and I sympathize with her. I can provide a more positive breakdown, from years ago. English teacher realized approximately 5 minutes into the discussion of a book that only a few people had done the assigned reading, and he put his book on a table and went on a tear about how you can't just go through life assuming that other people will pick up your slack, and that it's important to value your education and not just bullshit your way through classes. I could tell he was disappointed in the class, and several students were embarrassed for not putting in a little bit of effort to read a ducking book. If you like it and want to see more, please like the video and subscribe.